Our special guest today is Aleks Jakulin, founder and president of Data.Flowers, former professor at Columbia, and a founder with 3 exits, including one to NVIDIA. He was one of the people that originally developed the PNG and JPEG standards. Talks about AI governance, kind of like fire codes and having a fire department. Warns about the AI oligopoly and the amazing things he's looking forward to in AI over the next day. Enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, to the AI Risk Reward podcast. And today we've got a deep dive into AI governance and back to the beginnings of AI and deep learning with Aleks Jakulin, founder and president of Data.Flowers, former professor at Columbia, and a founder with 3 exits, including one to NVIDIA. Welcome, Aleks.
Hello, Alec.
Yeah, so it's a little confusing having an Aleks and an Alec, but we've already got that going on in my house anyway. So my older son is Aleks. So obviously you've been an AI researcher for a long time, involved with data. So tell us a little bit about your work and your background before we start doing our deep dive here.
Well, probably the most widely known work that I've done are the PNG and the JPEG LS standards. I did that as a teenager. And then I dedicated myself to AI research, where I worked on a couple of different topics, including data visualization, but also the problem of conceptualization, like how can computers come up with new concepts? This is important when you're trying to have computers come up with deeper ideas, connect things that are not explicitly connected in the literature. And I developed some of the early work that proved the viability of deep learning. After that, I spent some time exploring the probability and uncertainty, because like one of the problems of artificial intelligence is kind of knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. It's a specific problem that's required to address the problems of hallucination, epistemology. So many of those things have not yet been brought to applied practice, but hopefully over the next decade, these things will trickle into the applied AI.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. And as you think about AI governance, which is very broad, a very broad term, obviously, as we're thinking about how to control AI, what to allow people to do, things like that. What core principles should guide AI governance to balance innovation, like you're talking about, with safety?
It's funny. I would draw an analogy between the current approaches to AI safety and thought police, right? Because the current approaches are trying to determine if certain thoughts, like everything that comes out of an LLM is fundamentally thoughts, right? Like they're trying to police that. Yet these are just thoughts. They haven't been brought into practice. We carry a wide variety of thoughts inside our minds. And it's only when we take actions that these things actually need to be viewed and supervised, and we need to be held accountable, right? So we are trying to do this very intrusive type of risk control, which in turn is a massive risk. It's like having someone in your mind checking every thought. I mean, come on, this is the risk. It's not us having funny thoughts. It's having someone inside our head listening to every thought and verifying it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is very little that we have when it comes to actually holding systems accountable, making sure that certain actions can be rewound and undone. And, now we've got all of these AI agents that are entering institutions and systems that have been designed for people that are considerably more careful and have a broader scope of understanding, and there is certification and everything. Okay? And now these bots are coming in and they're going to wreck the systems. So we're gonna destroy the human institutions around actions and decision making and everything, but like we're not actually creating a meaningful replacement for that would be resilient to the kind of intrinsic entropy of what AI does. So in summary, I think the current approaches to AI safety are quite misguided.
Yeah. So taking a step back, what do you recommend? Is there one or two things that we should be thinking about going forward to improve this approach?
Yeah, I mean, I would draw an analogy between AI and fire. Like, of course, fire can be dangerous and we would like to regulate fire and whatever, but we cannot actually regulate fire directly. You know, like fire, like thoughts, it's out there. Bad things are going to happen. The way we regulate as a human society fire is fire codes, fire departments, fire extinguishers, right? Like we cannot control fire, but we can control the impact or the worst case scenarios around fire. This is something that's evolved through millennia of human use of fire. So, you know, when you cannot prevent people from playing with fire, I mean, what you can do is you can prevent people from stockpiling flammable materials in large quantities, right? And we're not doing that. We continue to kind of like pretend that we can control fire.
And as you think about it, so there's a difference between AI governance, which again is, hey, let's make sure this doesn't catch on fire. Let's have fire codes. Let's have fire extinguishers in a fire department, and ethics or AI ethics, right? And there are a lot of important ethical questions around AI from, wow, what if it starts putting a lot of people out of work? I mean, that's obviously a very important ethical question, all the way to, I mean, you're a data scientist originally, questions about anonymizing data, consumer data, things like that, and then using that to train models. So what are a few principles around ethical use of AI that you apply in or have applied in your own work?
I would argue that AI is not so new. You know, we've had the notion of a corporation for a long time. You know, a corporation is not a human, and yet the corporation can do business, can own property, can do a variety of things. So what is the ethics of corporations? You know, like to some extent, we've already got these AIs that are really corporations, you know, even partnerships, even states, right? So everything that applies to these disembodied, you know, corporate entities is also what can be used to be applied to AI. Now, I would argue that the vast majority of applications of AI is not actually like disembodied intelligences. Instead, AI technologies are used not to create disembodied AI, but to boost our own intelligence. Now, it's intelligence augmentation that's a far more widespread use case than actual AI. Even, you know, with AI agents that are somewhat autonomous, like usually they are working on behalf of some specific individual that can be held responsible for whatever they do, that are carrying that person's signature. So I would ask you, hey, like all of these AI ethicists, maybe they should apply all of their expertise to actually the ethical behavior of states, companies, NGOs, and so on. Because if they haven't done that, why would they say that they're competent in adjudicating what AI can do?
Yeah, that's fair. Look, part of it is obviously transparency, meaning like if we're not sure if a company or organization is really going to be ethical about what they're doing with AI, the more they tell us about it, the more transparency there is, whether that's open weights for models or disclosing what data they're using to train or whatever. That can be an important step forward in terms of ethics, because it allows not just the people inside the company, but people outside that organization, whether governments or NGOs or just consumers, to look at that and go, whoa, you're doing that with my data? Like, I'm just not going to participate, right?
So there are two issues here. The first one is this question of privacy, which, strangely enough, in spite of all the talk about privacy, we've mostly got promises of privacy, but we don't actually have privacy by design. Our systems are fundamentally not private. We're just kind of trusting a bunch of parties to promise us privacy when technology actually allows them to go in and do whatever they want. Okay, so a lot of the so-called privacy protection is fundamentally retrenching the power of certain agents, human agents, corporate agents, in the broader ecosystem. And their power by far exceeds the power of anyone who could, in the past, engage in surveillance. So I think we have a massive problem there, and it's not being talked about. As for, the questions of transparency, I think the bottleneck of the current approaches is we don't hold people and companies accountable enough for their actions. Like, it's so easy to get away with misdeeds, right? So if you held people accountable, then people would also ensure that things won't get done without their knowledge, or that their actions are going to be based on data that's not disclosed or is of low quality, right? So the way you solve these problems is you really hold everyone in the society accountable, and then they in turn will hold their tools accountable for whatever predictions, generations, et cetera, and the provenance and the quality of the underlying logic and of the underlying facts. But we do have a large problem around the sustainability of data. So right now, all of these AI models are both trained on all of these copyrighted materials without compensation, and one can argue with, if this is fair use or not fair use. I would even argue that most of the time it's fair use, but then the same data comes into play again as a part of context priming. Okay, so you might have heard the term RAG, R-A-G. So this is another spot where data comes into AI's processes. And this is actually the spot where it's not, very rarely, it's exceedingly rare that it would be fair use when data is used for priming. So again, the people who are describing themselves as experts in AI and ethics are kind of oblivious to this thing. So I think there's been a pretty unethical race for positions of power by these ethicists who, number one, are not qualified, are not competent, and don't look for expert advice when they should have. And that's in part the reason why we're in this pickle right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thinking about AI behaviors, right? How can we verify AI behaviors, especially something that might be emergent that we're unaware of or was unintended without exposing sensitive models or data? Like is there a process for that at all? Or
yes, there are processes for that. But it starts with actual accountability. And then whenever you've got infrastructure in the society, and AI is a part of this infrastructure, it needs to be built in a way where you don't have catastrophic failures. Right? Like we don't have that design. We're increasingly dependent on a small number of purveyors of this type of technology, of this type of infrastructure, and this is a fundamental risk.
Yeah.
Right. So you cannot ensure this type of regulation. You cannot have 2 power plants for the whole country. You need to have lots of power plants. Okay. And then you need to have a grid that ensures that, the failure of one of these power plants is not going to cause a collapse. And we don't have that.
Yeah.
And the companies that are, advocating for this hyper centralized infrastructure are themselves gonna, sprinkling themselves with the ethics fairy dust and pretending that that only they can ensure that this is going to be ethical and so on. No, this is just wrong. We need to approach AI and we need to approach data the same way that we're approaching energy infrastructure, transportation infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And going back to your fire codes analogy, is there some kind of framework that we should be using or has or should be developed around this?
Yes, I'm sure that we can develop a framework around it, but no one's asked me for input, before you did, and haven't had any resources to develop that. But I obviously know a little bit about AI, so I could do these things provided the right circumstances.
Yeah. Look, I think a lot of large institutions, especially the large financial institutions, have started to adopt in the U.S. the NIST AI risk management framework, right? But it's a very broad, right? It's not very prescriptive. It's a start, right? But it's not an end, and it's not detailed enough to differentiate itself between, what should a bank do versus what should a car parts manufacturer do, right, when they're using AI?
It's just the wrong place to approach these things. Like, we need to approach the institutions that are downstream of AI because they're going to be impacted by that. Like, you cannot have a fire prevention department, right? You have the fire department.
Yeah.
Like, most of what fire departments do is equipping people to stop fires once they happen, because they will happen.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and I guarantee that you're correct on that. We're going to have big AI hacks, AI failures, all kinds of AI problems in the future. It's just law of large numbers. If you're using AI millions and billions of times, sometimes it's going to be wrong or make a mistake or have a problem, right?
I mean, people make mistakes. People are wrong, right? So, we have accountability loops, and it's basically, not having this type of accountability loops at a, granular enough level that's causing systemic risk. Because we're too dependent on too few companies that have, excessive leverage.
Yeah, and lots of money as well to lobby,
to buy regulation. Yeah, regulatory capture.
And as you point out, also ignore laws when it doesn't suit them, like copyright laws, right? Just go, just sue us, right? Like, it's gonna make our models better, and if we have to pay some money in the future, so be it. Well, I want to switch gears and look, you've your work in the past is focused on, hey, how can AI conceptualize things or create truly new concepts? Jeffrey Hinton picked up on some of that. You could just talk a little bit about that work. It's very, may not be novel for you, but I think it's a novel for a lot of the audience out there.
The fundamental approach to machine learning has been that we try to predict consequences from underlying causes. So, we can think about, okay, if you want to, have like a well-behaved, intelligent kid, like what should you do, right? Or if you want to have a high-quality product, what should be the inputs? And the fundamental realization that I made was that it's sometimes not an individual feature that makes all the difference. Sometimes it's a combination of features. For example, imagine you're trying to determine whom to give a loan, right? Like you've got someone who's lived in one place for a long time. Okay, lower risk. You have someone who got a job. Sure, lower risk. But like, what happens when someone changed the job and moved at the same time? It seems like very risky. Not necessarily, because sometimes people move for a better job, and that is actually a reduction of risk. So you need to look at two features at the same time and their impact. So this is, to some extent, it was known as a problem of interaction effects in regression models. So I looked into that, and it turns out that developing these interaction models well with large and complex interactions was the way that the computers could come up with new concepts. And there was a simple algorithm that I developed that would allow the computer to explore a combination of different features and then determine basically new concepts. One of the stunning moments was when I asked my algorithm to find me words with with this type of interaction effect, and out comes the concept of a franc. So franc was apparently a word with multiple meanings. But if you look in the dictionary, franc is just a currency. Well, it turns out that the French franc and the Swiss franc, this is like historical data, but, these two types of currency were mutually exclusive. You either had the French articles that were talking about the French franc and the Swiss articles that were talking about the Swiss francs. And they were mutually exclusive. So the computer successfully identified a complex word with multiple meanings. That wasn't known. And to me, it was proof that, my algorithm is able to discover new concepts. But the example that really impressed me was the game of tic-tac-toe, where the algorithm, without knowing anything about geometry, came up with center, edges, diagonals, and it's completely emergent. This came out of just trying to play the game of tic-tac-toe the best it could. So I was invited to give a talk at the Gatsby unit in London, and there were maybe 5 people who came to my talk, and one of them was Jeff Hinton. So
you don't need a lot of people in the audience; you just need the right people.
Yeah. But in academia, a little bit is the research, but a little bit is also trying to find positions, trying to get research grants, trying to get students, trying to get positions of power. And I was just kind of interested in the research part. I was not so much interested in the publicity part.
Yeah, makes sense. So obviously you've done a fair amount of work on open source models and collaboration, including PNG and JPEGs. And obviously we've got this dichotomy out there in AI land where there's a whole bunch of open source, or at least, public weights, models out there, maybe not completely open, but partially open, versus very secret closed source. We're not telling you anything, right? And what are your thoughts about that dichotomy, and how does that, transparency, or at least partial transparency, help or hurt? And I want to give one quick example on the open source side. On the open source side, it helps us as the public or practitioners understand, how's the model built? How's it working? Allows me to test it, perturb the weights, see if anything changes. But also it allows the bad guys to take a model, stick it in an air-gapped environment, and do all kinds of crazy stuff. Hey, help me build a virus or a exploit or a dirty bomb or whatever, and no one could ever know because it's air-gapped. So how do we? So yes, it is important to have people that are accountable. It is important to have a fire code and fire departments for AI, but we've got this very natural tension between open source models and not. How do we think about that?
I mean, the technology is out there, right? There is a number of these open source models, and you cannot really easily predict what's in there. You can try, but most of the time it's sometimes a little obscure. What you can control is what is the data that's used for training, right? So if you're going to put the manuals on how to build a nuclear bomb into the training data, well, then the model is going to have this information. And if you don't, it's not. And then the same thing happens when you're priming the context, like when the RAG of your AI, and there are other technologies other than RAG, but I'm just using RAG as a simplification. Like when that has access to the bomb making guidelines, well, then you are going to get this type of information out. So the information regulation really happens at the preceding step, right? It's not like what does the model say? It's more like what data does the AI have access to for training, and what data does the AI have access to for context priming? And it's really fascinating to compare the difference in output that you get between systems that use the whole internet as input and the system that use a very curated subset of the information. For example, there is this system called the apologist agent, which is a kind of a Christian chatbot. And, the Christian chatbot has only access to the Christian texts as a source. And the output is super clean. Just like everything that comes out of it is like really clean and tidy and well-formed. And yeah, I mean, it's not like it took a lot of effort and red teaming and God knows what. It's just that, when you have clean input, you're going to get pretty clean output. And when you have garbage in, you get garbage out. So when you're using the whole internet without real curation, without real permission, to prime the output, well, you're going to get lots of things out. But you should be looking at the inputs, not at the outputs, right? Like if you want to do food safety properly, you're going to apply food safety to the ingredients.
Right.
Because the cooking process is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But you get all these ethics people trying to make a huge science of the outputs without really, taking proper care about the inputs. I mean, it sounds very simple, but like, why is this not being done?
And now a word from our sponsor. Artificial Intelligence Risk Inc. accelerates adoption of GenAI safely. They provide the governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity platform that financial, healthcare, and other regulated organizations need before they can use GenAI safely and in compliance with regulatory requirements. Their software has won #1 awards for cybersecurity and compliance from Waters Technology. Find them at aicrisk.com. I agree, and we talked about this before. I think there's just so much power in these large companies. It's effectively an oligopoly, right? And they have made ethical decisions and legal decisions that they're just going to ignore a lot of those issues. Which is why it's up to kind of society and regulators and government to figure out a way to, like, hey, how do we dial this back, right? And I think one of the important things for the audience to understand is that there's a pretty big difference between traditional software and AI software, whether it's machine learning or Gen AI or whatever, in that the failure modes are very different, right? If I have a piece of traditional software, let's say it's accounting software, and something goes wrong, it's probably just going to bomb on my machine or give me numbers that are so crazy, it'll be like, yeah, that's wrong. I need to go fix that. And it's certainly not going to try to lie to me about things or hallucinate, right? But with AI, especially Gen AI, like the failure modes are just different, right? It may be making things up just to seemingly make.
But this is how it works. It by definition is making things up, right? Like the responsibility cannot be placed on the random text generator. The responsibility needs to go to whoever's using it.
Right. My point is, I think the public, regulators, et cetera, need to understand, like, hey, this is a non-deterministic process, right? It should be giving you different answers each time. And if it doesn't have the training data or access to the data through RAG, it's just going to either make something up, or maybe it'll say yes, or I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think it should disclose the inputs that go into the RAG. I mean, just from my perspective as a user, I want to see that. I want to see the information that's going in, because I could actually eliminate some of that information, or I would like to add some of that information. Now, when it comes to the regulation, I mean, sure, you can impose a huge amount of regulation on AI companies in US and Europe, and then people are just gonna use an AI system out of China or Somalia or wherever. Like, you cannot really, unless you really block communications around the world, like, people will be using, whatever AI they will. And I mean, now I can install a pretty sophisticated model and run it on my own computer. Like, you cannot really control this technology at the source. You can control the inputs, you can control the outputs.
Yeah, and look, as Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger said for a long time, in terms of investing and behavior of corporations, organizations, it's all about incentives, right? And incentives to store systems. And one of the things that's going on right now is you have this race for AGI, and the big US companies are saying, we got to get there before China, like all these safety and ethical things, we got to throw them out the window because we got to run as fast as we can. Obviously, the Chinese aren't going to wait. That's certainly going on, but also very interesting for OpenAI specifically. They have a revenue sharing agreement with Microsoft, who's a big investor in OpenAI. As soon as they declare that they have gotten to AGI and an independent panel agrees with them, their 20% revenue share with Microsoft stops. So they literally have a giant monetary incentive to declare AGI, even if they're not really kind of sort of sure, right? Because there's such a big, effectively, bonus to them if they do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's the promised land, and it's kind of a race to get to the promised land, irrespective whether it exists or not, or whether the whole thing is going to be successful or not successful. But like, we can see that people who are promising the impossible do get the resources. I'm not so sure that the ethics community really knows what it's doing. Right, like I don't think the regulators are approaching this in a sensible way. So, like I would probably approach these things more the way we approach wild animals, right? Like we cannot regulate animals, but like we can regulate the people who use those animals. So this then, it's a much more feasible and practical approach to preventing negative impact. The thing is, like, we're still as a society dependent on people like making phone calls and like authenticating themselves on the phone. Like, computers can now do this without humans, and all of these systems that are dependent on this type of calls are going to fail. We used to depend on people being able to send a coherent, carefully written email. Well, now computers can do that, right? So all of the systems that depend on someone actually filling in a form or sending an email are going to get broken by, a bunch of robots doing it. Like we're seeing, a reduction in the hiring. Well, in part, it's because folks are using AIs to apply for jobs. And then people who are actually hiring are never sure if this is human or if it's an AI or whatever. Like the systems that have been working okay before AI no longer work okay. And
yeah,
like you're not going to stop that, but like, we need to allocate our attention to addressing the systems that the AI is breaking, rather than pretend that we can somehow prevent AI from being applied to this type of situations, because we can't.
Yeah, great point. So as we think about connecting technical risk with economic and societal risk, like, what are you most concerned about there right now?
I mean, it's a lot of a lot of things going on, but the primary one is basically the systems that are not AI resilient failing, which we've been seeing. The other aspect is basically over leveraging, being too dependent on too few things that are just intrinsically not controllable. The third thing is just having the right metrics. Like, what are we really after? I think there is this beautiful potential value in having a more intelligent society. Of having people who behave more intelligently. And AI technology can help a lot. But we've been obsessed with this pursuit of disembodied intelligence, which has so many problems with it. Because when it's disembodied, it's intrinsically unaccountable or half accountable. But when we look at, say, intelligence amplification, then we know that people are responsible for their actions. So the accountability kind of comes down to whoever's the owner of the dog, not the dog itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look, as we think about these different things and think about, business transformation, right? So we've already talked about it. Wow, like there's certainly things that weren't designed for AI that AI is going to break, right? Like if I just accept job applications in an email form, I'm going to get 1,000, right? If I make people meet me in person in New York City, I'm going to get 50, right? So we may have to go back to some of the stuff, pre-COVID that, we used to do. But let's think about AI business transformation and AI, and let's think about, longer term, like 5 or 10 years, like where, and some organizations haven't even started. Like where should they start? How should they think about this? How should they align it with business strategy in the long term?
Yeah, I would say the number one step is just to ensure the systems that the AI can break are properly modified to be resilient to customers using AI, suppliers using AI, potential employees using AI, even employees inside the company using AI. Mm-hmm. The second thing, and this is the core of my current work, is the development, very conscious development of high quality data infrastructure. Okay, like we've got communication infrastructure, we've got energy infrastructure, we've got transportation infrastructure, but we do not have data infrastructure. We cannot work with data directly, but we always work with data through some application. And then we run into issues like, okay, the form that I filed to IRS, it's some PDF, and I cannot modify it, I cannot see it. Well, in reality, it's data that I can be modifying while it's, at the IRS, right? Like, or, for example, I cannot get like a list of potential suppliers for, particular type of widget directly. I have to go and fill in the form on Google and then look at the results, along with a bunch of other ads. But like data can be a first-class citizen. People can work with data directly. And I've explained earlier that this data is used both for training the AI models and it's used for context priming. So having data infrastructure that, allows the companies to contain the data that's potentially used there is the best way to ensure that, that you don't get garbage in, garbage out.
That makes
as for what comes, the period when we develop data infrastructure is probably going to be the next 5 to 10 years. After 10 years, I think the focus is going to be on how do we really think about autonomous entities, right? Like we already have companies. Companies are like autonomous entities, and AI is gonna lead to more of that, to more entities that are not an extension of an individual. We're already noticing that the behavior of companies is not often ethical. But we lack the mental tools for working with that. Like we still try to find, the responsible person and put them in prison. But like the damage that a company can do is disproportionate to what any individual can bear as a punishment. So we need to like properly balance these things, right? Like the ability of a state or company to do bad and evil, right, needs to be balanced with something on the other side. And we're still overly reliant on personal responsibility, and in conditions of diminishing respect for ethics. We just need to think more game theoretically about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if we apply that to cybersecurity and thinking about, nation states out there doing bad things, I mean, North Korea is a great example. They're out there stealing money and crypto and pretending people are working in the US when they're really North Korean spies. And I was talking to the CTO of a large bank several months ago, and he said, hey, we just caught 2 North Korean moles in our organization and kicked them out. And I said, how many are left? Right? You can't guarantee me there's not more there. So this is happening. So back to your concept of resilience to everyone using more AI as models integrate deeply into workflows. What new security risks emerge? I mean, obviously, we've got things like data leakage, that's pretty obvious. Maybe model tampering, obviously, prompt injections, number one risk from OWASP in terms of Gen AI. And how should companies redesign their defenses? What should regulators be requiring at this point? This sounds like like fire codes to me.
Yeah, I think the bigger risk is problem states using AI than some problem with AI that we're using internally. Like if a rogue state has 1,000 engineers using AI to do bad things, I mean, what do? Like we just have to think about it game theoretically, not ethics doesn't really apply. Like this is you have to make sure that that there's sufficient deterrence to bad behavior, and we need to explore that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
But I don't think that when you've got companies that are led by people who are generally good people, that we know who they are, we know who's on the team, that these companies are reasonably transparent. I think these companies gonna take their mission seriously, and we're overly fixated on trying to regulate them, which in turn is really a kind of a power-seeking behavior by the wannabe regulators. I think too much energy is going into that, and it's the wrong type of energy. It's a bunch of ideologically motivated activists who don't really care about human flourishing or the well-being of a society, but are more interested in thought policing, to be aligned with their ideology, and this is extremely counterproductive.
Yeah. So as AI continues to advance and make its way more into work and everyday life, obviously you've been a university professor. What should universities and, let's say, continuing ed programs or companies in terms of training change so graduates can work well with AI systems and not just learn tools that will be obsolete in a year?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. AI is like a calculator. To some extent, no one should be overly dependent on having a calculator. But at the same time, people should know how to use a calculator properly. And the same with AI. Mm-hmm. Like, we cannot possibly try to ban it. People are going to be using it to do work. But at the same time, we need to hold, say, students accountable for their output. They cannot just submit a paper and not understand what it says. Sure, I use AI to create my essays, right? But I know everything that they say, and I can be held accountable for the product. We need to do the same thing. And this is often not going to be verifiable unless the professor actually goes and dives in and ensures that the product is of sufficiently high quality. So I think there are going to be fewer long essays that are hard to verify, and there is going to be more carefully developed short form analysis and synthesis that can be verifiable. Another concept is reproducibility, right? Like, don't give me the essay, give me the ingredients that then AI can use to synthesize the answer.
Yep, makes sense. Now, as we think about AI and the future of finance and transactions, and maybe throw blockchain in there just for fun and crypto, how is the convergence of AI and finance? It's obviously going to create kind of new risks, right? And going back to the whole fire code saying, look, we've got a bunch of regulations around payments and consumers and banking and things like that, like Reg E and things like that, which should probably obviously apply to AI and anything anyone's trying to do in terms of payments. Like, we don't need to make up a new set of rules around that. But I think the issue, as you were pointing out, is we need more resilience to everyone else who's using AI, right? So things like, so I'll give you some stats. The amount of fraudulent account openings at banks in the US has skyrocketed to the point where probably about a third of online account openings are actually fraudulent right now, right? Because people are just using AI to fake documents or pretend to be someone they're not or whatever, or do account takeovers or apply for accounts where the person's not even real, right? So all kinds of crazy stuff. So perspective on fraud detection, predictive finance using AI, and where this automation creates systemic risk, right?
Yeah, I think pretending we can predict these things ahead of time is like the root problem, right? Like, we cannot predict these things. We need to make sure that game theoretically bad actions don't pay off. Ethics is the instrument of last resort. They're just game theoretically needs to be mechanism design that makes sense, that's resilient to this type of work. So, like, we need to go back to tracking collateral. We need to go back to properly instrumenting, data sharing that will prevent basically bad actors from going from institution to institution to institution. We need to get over this, ideological chanting about privacy to actually creating a society that works for the people that do good, and doesn't work for people that do bad.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, finance is one of those things that, to some extent, it's an algorithm, right? Like, it's not like we've got some intelligence that's intrinsically ethically in tune with what it's doing. Finance is like an AI, right? And entrusting the development of a society to just, a single number of, economic growth is a terrible idea. We need to get out of this reliance on algorithms. The same thing applies to media. Like, the way that, like, the first thing that got automated is basically the role of an editor. Like, when you do a search, you're relying on some algorithm that basically decides what you're going to see. When you open social media, you're relying on an algorithm to decide what news to show you, right? Like, this is one of the most important things that we've automated away. And, these things are too important to be automated away like this. So we need to be more cognizant, right? Like, the shift towards algorithmic media has started happening in like 2002. We're well over 20 years into algorithmic media, and we see what is happening. We see the polarization, we see all of this engagement forming and other behaviors. Like, we're almost like destroying democracy through over-reliance on algorithms instead of accountable institutions. So that's something to think about.
So one of the organizations that has incredible transparency around accidents is in aviation, right? In the U.S., you've got the FAA, the NTSB. Obviously, there are national versions of those organizations. If anything bad happens, we got the black box. We're playing the recorder. We know exactly what happens. Now, there is a little bit of aircraft manufacturers always trying to blame the pilots, right? If there's a problem. But other than that, in general, the incident reporting system is actually pretty robust. There's also a separate incident reporting system run by NASA. And what's important about that is if you have a close call as a pilot and you report it on NASA, you're basically given a get out of jail free card for reporting it. In other words, if you report something, it turns out you did something wrong or there was a problem and they come after you for reporting it, you get a pass, like literally a free pass. So that obviously encourages reporting because there's a personal benefit to reporting as a pilot, right? So how do we think about an AI incident reporting system like aviation safety reporting? Like, is that feasible? Like
OECD has like AI incident reporting system, but it's currently just tracking. It's not allowing the entry of this information. So if you're interested, I can point you to this effort, and I know the people who are doing it. I think it's a beautiful analogy that you're making, and this is exactly the direction that we should be pursuing. It's basically creating data infrastructure around incident reporting, and around providing a greater degree of transparency, especially for important decisions. And the whole thing can also be secure, right? Like it doesn't mean that anyone can look at that, but in case of an incident, then this records can be unlocked and examined. So things like this would be around developing the infrastructure. It's a particular example of data infrastructure for the purpose of transparency, of effective feedback loops, of accountability loops, and of the diagnosis of primary causes.
Yeah, and I think MIT also has a reporting system as well, right, where they categorize incidents to different groups. Yeah, so obviously sounds like it's mostly voluntary right now, but obviously that could be made mandatory or could be super helpful in the future. And like thinking about things like this, broadly defined AI governance, and I don't know how that's going to happen. Is that internal, external accountability, organizations, regulators, whatever it is? Like, what does success look like 10 years from now? Obviously fewer failures, better resilience, like we're talking about, but how do we define success? Because without that, it's kind of hard to know what to do.
Yeah, I think it would be a combination of human flourishing, combined with kind of an economic well-being that's sustainable well-being. And finally, it's it's intelligence of the society as a whole. Making good decisions, engaging in positive, effective governance.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Now, if we become more reactive, meaning like, okay, we've got fire departments for AI, right? What early warning signals should we be looking for, or problems like, the equivalent of having a smoke alarm in your house or your apartment that's telling us that AI is drifting into crisis territory or a fire has started, basically?
Yeah, and usually you notice this in the surrounding systems, right? Like when you cannot reach someone, when there is an information jam, when there is a traffic jam. All of these things fundamentally can be monitored. And then, if you notice that things are going off track, you need to understand why are they going off track. But yeah, like I think accountability loops are really, really important. Like we need to think more game theoretically and rely less on person ethics, like the tax that the societies are paying for the bad actions of a tiny minority have grown excessive.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely true. Now, taking a step back, you know a lot about AI. What's something you know for sure about AI that other people don't or is not widely accepted yet?
I think AI is out there. Like the models that are open source that you can run on your own computer. They're pretty good. I think people are somehow thinking that AI is a centralizing technology. I think it's a decentralizing technology. It brings a lot of power to individual companies, individual organizations, individual cities, individual communities. It's actually going to reduce the relative importance of these large centralized companies. I might be wrong about that, but like to me, it seems that being able to have access to something that can translate, that can spell check, that can interpolate between documents, and it runs well enough on my own computer, and there is often just a few months delay between, say, one of the top models having it and then like just open source models having it. Like this is striking. This is magical. We've compressed the width of humanity into something that basically has the size of a memory stick. You can run on a commodity chip that maybe costs $100. Like this is modern magic, and it doesn't have to be perfect because it's useful. The second thing that I don't think many people understand is just the importance of data infrastructure. I think we're still kind of thinking that there's going to be applications that are going to be at the forefront when the reality of AI is I can make my own application in 5 minutes. But I need the rails that this application is going to run on. And those rails currently are not robust.
Yeah.
And data infrastructure is going to be those rails that will allow all of this vibe-coded, homemade applications to still function reliably, while at the same time allowing you the ability to undo, to rewind, and to diagnose and debug problems downstream after they happen.
Yeah. So what breakthrough in AI would give you the most hope about improving everyday life, and why?
I think visual communication is would be really, really powerful. Our visual cortex is our mind's GPU, and like we're still like in these blocks of text as if it was 1960. right? Like we can communicate graphically. Like you look at the kids, they're sending emoji back and forth, right? Like we can be communicating graphically at a much higher bandwidth with much more expressiveness. And I think visual and graphical communication is one of the absolutely most exciting things that will be developing in the course of the next couple of months to years. For example, like this most recent version of Nano Banana by Google, Gemini, is capable of generating infographics, to give you like visual summaries of articles, of ideas. And I think this is just going to get better. So,
absolutely.
We're going to be doing fewer lists. We're going to be doing more maps. We're going to be doing fewer papers. We're going to be doing more infographics.
Yeah. And along those lines, where do you see AI creating the most or the greatest positive impact for people, for humanity? Is it in healthcare? Is it somewhere else?
I think it's absolutely fascinating how we can accelerate the human timelines, right? Like currently we have this really complex society, and it takes probably 30 years still to bring up a human, right? I think this technology is going to be able to shrink this. And I think we're going to have, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are fundamentally going to be capable of living, starting families, having jobs, spending fewer years in this stifling education environment. I think this is going to unleash so much human potential, and AI can make that happen.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That's a great question to close on, I think, because that was so amazing. Yeah, this is what a great show. Aleks, thanks for coming on the show today.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So this has been Aleks Jakulin, founder and president at Data.Flowers. And do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Data.Flowers.
And you're on LinkedIn, any other websites, social media, anything you want to point out? Or
just go to Data.Flowers and you'll find everything you need.
Awesome. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Alec.
You are listening to the AI Risk Reward Podcast with your host, Alec Crawford. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, for example, Apple Podcasts. Production and sound engineering by Troutman Street Audio. You can find them on LinkedIn. Please like, subscribe, and comment.